The photograph, taken by Hine on September 14, 1911, near Belzoni, Mississippi, shows something that millions of Americans preferred not to see, despite it being commonplace across the agricultural South. A child laborer. The boy in the image is approximately 8 years old based on Hine's field notes, though he might be younger or older. Malnutrition and hard labor made age determination difficult among child workers whose growth was stunted by inadequate food and excessive physical demands. He stands approximately 4 feet 2 inches tall, weighs an estimated 52 pounds based on comparative analysis with other documented children his age, and holds a wooden basket that measures roughly 14 inches in diameter and 8 inches deep. The basket contains cotton, not the raw bolls still attached to plants, but the clean white fiber that results from separating the cotton from its protective capsule and the sharp-edged bracts that surround each boll. His hands, visible gripping the basket's sides, show the telltale signs of cotton picking. Small cuts and scratches from the boll's sharp edges, staining from the plant's natural oils, and calluses that shouldn't exist on an 8-year-old's palms. September 14, 1911, 9:23 a.m. Cotton plantation approximately 6 miles northeast of Belzoni, Mississippi. Temperature 87 degrees Fahrenheit and rising toward the day's predicted high of 94 degrees. Humidity 78%. The air thick enough that breathing requires conscious effort even without physical exertion. Samuel Thomas, 8 years old and employed as cotton picker since age 5, has been working for 4 hours and 36 minutes since his day began at 4:47 a.m. and he's picked approximately 43 pounds of cotton during that time, filling and emptying his basket 7 times into the larger sacks that field supervisors weigh at day's end to calculate each picker's earnings. His current basket contains approximately 11 pounds of cotton. Samuel can judge weight by feel after 3 years of daily picking, which means he needs to gather about 4 more pounds before this load is complete, and he can empty it into his family's collection sack and start filling another basket for the 8th time today. The process of picking cotton is deceptively simple in description, but brutally demanding in execution. Cotton plants stand approximately 3 to 4 feet tall in September, when bolls mature and burst open to reveal the white fiber inside. Each plant produces 40 to 60 bolls over the course of the growing season, and each boll contains approximately 7 to 10 grams of usable cotton fiber. To pick 1 pound of cotton, 454 grams, requires harvesting approximately 50 to 65 bolls. To pick 100 pounds of cotton, the standard measurement for calculating wages, requires harvesting approximately 5,000 hours to 6,500 bolls. Each boll must be picked individually by hand, pulling the cotton away from the boll's sharp-edged bracts that protect the fiber but cut human skin with minimal pressure. The repetitive motion, reach, grasp, pull, drop in basket, repeat, must be performed 5,000 to 6,500 times to earn the 40 cents that plantation owners pay per 100 pounds picked. Samuel has performed this motion approximately 2,800 times already this morning to achieve his 43 pounds picked, and he will perform it approximately 6,700 more times before the day ends if he maintains his usual pace and reaches his typical daily total of 127 pounds. That number, 127 pounds, represents Samuel's peak performance, achieved during September when bolls are most abundant and weather conditions most favorable for picking. Earlier in the season, when bolls are sparse, Samuel's daily total drops to 80-90 pounds. Later in the season, when temperatures drop and Samuel's hands become too cold to work efficiently, his total might fall to 60 to 70 pounds. But September is prime picking season, and Samuel is expected to maximize his productivity because his family depends on his earnings to supplement the adult's income and pay rent on their 2-room sharecropper cabin. The man with the camera, Louis Wicks Hine, approaches Samuel at 9:23 a.m., while Samuel is halfway through filling his current basket. Hine is 37 years old, employed by the National Child Labor Committee as investigative photographer documenting child labor conditions across the United States. And he's been in Mississippi for 11 days, photographing children working in cotton fields, sawmills, and canneries. Hine's method is straightforward. He approaches child workers during their labor, asks permission from supervisors to photograph them, takes multiple images using his 5.7-inch glass plate camera, and records detailed notes about each child's age, working hours, wages, and working conditions. These photographs and notes will become evidence in the NCLC's campaign to pass federal child labor legislation, documentation that makes abstract statistics about child labor concrete and personal, through images of actual children performing actual labor under actual conditions that most Americans never witness. Hine positions his camera approximately 8 feet from Samuel, adjusts the focus and aperture to account for bright morning sunlight, and asks Samuel to stand still and look at the camera. The exposure requires approximately 1/25 of a second, fast enough to freeze motion in bright light, but still requiring Samuel to remain motionless to prevent blur. Samuel complies, holding his basket of cotton, his expression showing neither smile nor frown, but rather the blank neutrality of someone too tired to perform emotion for a stranger's camera. Hine takes 3 exposures over the course of 4 minutes, then approaches Samuel to record information for his field notes. "How old are you?" Hine asks, speaking in the gentle tone he's learned to use with child workers who often distrust adult strangers. Samuel's response, 8, sir. Be 9 in February. The sir is automatic. The required verbal deference that black children in 1911 Mississippi must show to white adults regardless of circumstance. Hine continues, "How long have you been picking cotton today?" Samuel glances at the sun's position to estimate time. "Since before sunrise. Maybe 4 hours." Actually, 4 hours and 36 minutes. But Samuel doesn't own a watch and has learned to judge time by sun position and stomach hunger. "How much do you pick in a full day?" Hine asks. Samuel's answer reveals both pride in his competence and resignation to his circumstances. 127 pounds when the picking's good, less when it's not. Family needs every pound I can get. Hine records these details in his notebook. Samuel Thomas, age 8, been picking since age 5, works 14-hour days during harvest season, picks up to 127 pounds daily, earns approximately 50 cents per day, 40 cents per 100 pounds plus proportional payment for additional pounds. Money goes to family, not to child. Hine also notes Samuel's physical condition. Undersized for age, probably malnourished. Hands show scarring from bowl cuts. Posture suggests back pain from constant bending. Appears exhausted despite day being half finished. These observations, combined with the photographs, will document not just that child labor exists, but what it costs the children who perform it. Their health, their growth, their education, and their childhood itself. Samuel's workday began at 4:47 a.m., 4 hours and 36 minutes before Hine photographed him. When Samuel's mother Mary woke him in the darkness of their cabin's single sleeping room that Samuel shares with his mother, his 2 younger sisters ages 6 and 4, and his infant brother age 18 months. Samuel's father died in 1909 from complications of pneumonia, leaving Mary to support 4 children on her own in a system designed to keep sharecroppers perpetually indebted to landowners. The sharecropping arrangement Mary operates under requires her family to pay $8 per month rent for their cabin and small garden plot, plus 50% of any crops they grow on their assigned acreage. Mary works as cotton picker, earning the same 40 cents per 100 pounds that Samuel earns. But her daily total of approximately 200 pounds generates about 80 cents per day. Samuel's 50 cents per day, plus his 6-year-old sister Clara's 25 cents per day, She picks approximately 60 pounds daily, brings family income to approximately $1.55 per day, or $9.30 per week, working 6 days with Sunday as required rest day. This income must cover the $8 monthly rent, $1.85 per week. Food for 5 people at approximately $4 per week, mostly cornmeal, beans, fatback, and whatever vegetables their garden produces. Clothing that costs approximately $2 per month, worth $50 per week. And firewood, lamp oil, and other necessities adding approximately $1 per week. The math is brutal. Family income of $9.30 per week against expenses of approximately $7.35 per week, leaving $1.95 per week savings if nothing unexpected occurs. But unexpected expenses occur constantly. Children get sick requiring doctor fees. Tools break requiring replacement. Clothing wears out faster than budgeted. The family operates on financial edge where Samuel's 50 cents per day represents the difference between survival and eviction. Which is why Samuel has been picking cotton since age 5, despite Mississippi's nominal school attendance laws. And despite the physical toll that cotton picking takes on growing bodies. Samuel learned to pick cotton through the same method used to train most child laborers: observation, imitation, and correction. At age 5, in 1908, Samuel began accompanying his mother and sister to the cotton fields, initially playing among the plants while the older workers harvested. But plantation supervisors don't tolerate non-working people in fields during harvest season. Even small children must contribute or leave. Samuel started picking at age 5, initially managing only 15 to 20 pounds per day because his small hands couldn't work as quickly as adults, and because he tired easily from the constant bending and reaching. His mother showed him efficient technique. Use both hands simultaneously, one hand holding the basket while the other picks. Keep the basket positioned so you're always picking directly into it, rather than holding cotton and then placing it in the basket. Develop rhythm so picking becomes automatic, rather than requiring conscious thought for each bowl. By age 6, Samuel's daily total had increased to 40 to 50 pounds. By age 7, 70 to 90 pounds. By age 8, his current 127-pound peak represents nearly matching adult productivity, despite being a child whose body hasn't finished growing and whose hands are smaller and less strong than adults. This productivity comes at cost that won't be fully apparent for years. Stunted growth from malnutrition. Samuel should weigh approximately 65 pounds at age 8, but he weighs only 52 pounds, a 20% deficit indicating chronic inadequate nutrition. Early onset joint problems from repetitive stress on developing bones and connective tissue, and educational deprivation. Samuel attended school approximately 23 days total during the past 3 years, learning minimal literacy and no mathematics beyond basic counting necessary for cotton picking. The immediate physical cost is more obvious. Samuel's hands hurt constantly during picking season from the hundreds of small cuts that cotton bolls inflict daily. His back aches from bending thousands of times per day. His legs and feet develop blisters and calluses from walking miles through fields while carrying increasingly heavy baskets. And his eyes burn from sweat and direct sun exposure during 14-hour days without adequate protection. Samuel has learned to manage this pain through techniques that child workers share among themselves. Wrap scratched hands in cloth during lunch break to reduce irritation. Stretch back and legs every time you empty a basket to prevent muscles from seizing. Close eyes periodically while picking to rest them from sun glare. These techniques help but don't eliminate the pain, merely making it bearable enough to continue working because stopping means losing income that family requires for survival. Lewis Hine photographs approximately 40 child workers during his 11 days in Mississippi, documenting children ranging from age 5 to 13 working in cotton fields, children as young as 7 operating dangerous machinery in sawmills, and children working 16-hour shifts in seafood canneries during shrimp season. Each photograph follows the same pattern. Child positioned in their work environment, holding tools or products of their labor, captured in moment that shows both their work and their youth. Hine's goal is creating visual evidence that makes child labor's reality undeniable. For audiences who might dismiss written statistics as exaggerated or fabricated by labor reform activists. A photograph of an 8-year-old boy holding a basket of cotton he picked proves that 8-year-olds pick cotton. The cuts on his hands prove the work is injurious. His small size proves he's malnourished. His presence in a field at 9:23 a.m. on a Thursday proves he's not in school. These photographs, combined with similar documentation from other states and industries, will eventually comprise a collection of more than 5,000 images that the National Child Labor Committee uses in their campaign for federal child labor legislation. The campaign will last 15 years from Hine's first photographs in 1908 to passage of the Keating-Owen Act in 1916, involving thousands of lectures illustrated with Hine's photographs, distribution of millions of pamphlets featuring the images, and lobbying of Congress members who are shown the photographs as evidence of conditions that federal law should address. Samuel's photograph is one of 143 images that will be shown to Congress members during hearings on the Keating-Owen Act in 1916, 5 years after Hine photographed him in that Mississippi cotton field. But on September 14, 1911, Samuel knows none of this future impact. He knows only that a white man with a camera asked him questions, took his photograph, and then moved on to photograph other children working nearby. Samuel returns to picking cotton at 9:27 a.m., 4 minutes after Hine finished photographing him. Because stopping means losing income, and because field supervisors don't tolerate workers standing idle regardless of why they stopped. He finishes filling his current basket by 9:33 a.m., bringing the total to approximately 15 pounds, empties it into his family's collection sack, and starts filling another basket for the 9th time today. The pace continues through late morning and into afternoon. Pick, empty basket, repeat. Reach, grasp, pull, drop in basket, repeat 5,000 times. Samuel's hands move automatically, his mind occupied with the kind of thoughts that help pass time during repetitive labor. Counting bowls picked per basket. Samuel estimates approximately 650 bowls per basket, a calculation he's developed through daily practice. Planning what he'll eat during the brief lunch break, cornmeal mush and fatback that his mother prepared before dawn, and thinking about the creek near their cabin, where he sometimes swims on Sunday afternoons if he's not too tired from the week's work. These thoughts help manage the boredom of tasks that require physical effort but no mental engagement, turning 14-hour days into an endurable sequence of small goals. Fill this basket, empty it, fill another, survive until lunch, survive until dinner, survive until the day ends. Samuel picks 31 more pounds between 9:27 a.m. and noon, bringing his total to 74 pounds in 7 hours and 13 minutes of work. The lunch break lasts 23 minutes. Samuel eating his cornmeal mush and fatback while sitting in shade of a persimmon tree at field's edge. His mother and sisters eating nearby, none of them talking because they're too tired for conversation and because the break is too short to waste on words. At 12:23 p.m., field supervisors signal that break has ended and workers must return to picking. Samuel stands, his back protesting the movement, after 23 minutes of sitting allowed it to stiffen, and walks back to his assigned row to resume filling baskets. The afternoon hours are the hardest. Temperature has climbed to 94 degrees, humidity remains above 75%, and Samuel has already been working for more than 7 hours. His hands hurt more now than they did in the morning because new cuts have accumulated on top of old cuts. His back has progressed from ache to sharp pain that makes bending difficult. And his water bottle is empty after drinking its contents during lunch break with no easy way to refill until evening. But Samuel continues picking because stopping means losing money. and because he's developed the mental discipline that child laborers require. The ability to ignore pain, ignore discomfort, ignore exhaustion, and continue performing repetitive tasks until permitted to stop. Samuel picks another 53 pounds between 12:23 p.m. and 6:47 p.m., bringing his daily total to 127 pounds in approximately 14 hours of labor. The sun is setting, the light becoming too dim for safe picking. Workers who pick in low light risk cutting hands more severely or accidentally picking immature bowls that supervisors reject. And field supervisors signal the end of the workday. Samuel and the other workers carry their collection sacks to weighing station, where plantation clerk records each family's daily total and calculates earnings. Samuel's family picked 387 pounds total today. Mary picked 203 pounds. Samuel picked 127 pounds. Clara picked 57 pounds. At 40 cents per 100 pounds, the family earned $155 today, approximately typical for their family's combined productivity. Samuel walks home at 7:02 p.m., arriving at the cabin at 7:19 p.m. after walking 1.1 miles from field to home. He's too tired to eat the dinner his mother has prepared, cornmeal mush again, with beans this time instead of fatback. But he forces himself to eat anyway, because he knows he needs food for tomorrow's work. He washes his hands and face using water from the barrel outside their cabin, wraps his worst hand cuts in strips of cloth torn from old clothing, and lies down on the pallet he shares with his sisters in their sleeping room. He falls asleep at approximately 7:47 p.m., will sleep until 4:47 a.m. when his mother wakes him to begin another day, and will repeat this pattern 6 days per week through October, when cotton season ends, and Samuel's family must find other work to survive the winter months when agricultural labor is scarce. This is Samuel Thomas's life at age 8. 14-hour workdays, 6 days per week, earning 50 cents per day that goes to family rather than to himself. Receiving approximately 23 days of formal education over 3 years. Living in poverty that makes child labor necessary for family survival, but that child labor income is insufficient to escape. This is the reality that Lewis Hine's photograph documents. The reality that Samuel and approximately 2 million other American children experience in 1911. The reality that the National Child Labor Committee is working to change through legislation that will make it illegal to employ children under age 14 in factories, mills, canneries, and mines. Though agricultural child labor will remain legal and common for decades longer, Samuel doesn't know that his photograph will help change child labor laws 5 years later. He doesn't know that his image will be shown to Congress members as evidence of conditions requiring federal intervention. He knows only that tomorrow he will wake at 4:47 a.m. and pick cotton for another 14 hours, that his hands will hurt and his back will ache and he will be exhausted by evening, and that the 50 cents he earns will be essential for his family's survival but insufficient to change their circumstances. He is 8 years old. He weighs 52 pounds. He picks 127 pounds of cotton per day at peak season. And he is one of millions of children whose labor sustains American agriculture in 1911 at the cost of their health, their education, and their childhood itself. Lewis Hine's photograph of Samuel Thomas, along with the 39 other child worker images he captured during his 11-day Mississippi trip, arrives at the National Child Labor Committee's New York office on October 3, 1911. 19 days after Hine took the photograph. The images come as glass plate negatives carefully packed in wooden crates designed to prevent breakage during railway shipping, each negative labeled with Hine's detailed field notes about the child pictured, their age, their working conditions, and their circumstances. The NCLC's staff photographer develops prints from Hine's negatives in the organization's darkroom, creating multiple copies of each image. One for the NCLC's archives, one for potential publication in reform magazines, and one for the traveling exhibitions that the NCLC uses to educate the public about child labor conditions. Samuel's photograph, showing him holding his basket of cotton with his scarred hands visible and his exhausted expression clear, becomes one of the NCLC's most frequently reproduced images over the next 5 years. The photograph appears in 23 different publications between 1911 and 1916, including reform magazines like The Survey, middle-class women's magazines like Ladies' Home Journal that increasingly support child labor reform, and illustrated lectures that NCLC staff members deliver to civic organizations, churches, and women's clubs across the United States. Each appearance of Samuel's photograph reaches audiences who might never visit a Mississippi cotton field, showing them visual evidence of what child labor actually looks like. Not abstract statistics about millions of children, but one specific 8-year-old boy whose hands are cut and whose body is undersized from malnutrition and whose childhood has been consumed by work. But Samuel himself experiences none of this impact during the years 1911-1916. He continues picking cotton through October 1911 as the season ends, his daily totals dropping from 127 pounds in mid-September to 95 pounds by mid-October as bolls become sparser and weather turns colder. By November, cotton season has ended completely, and Samuel's family must find alternative work to survive the winter months, when agricultural labor is scarce in Mississippi's Delta region. Samuel works occasional day labor jobs, chopping firewood for $0.15 per cord, hauling supplies for local businesses at $0.10 per hour, any task that an 8-year-old's strength can manage and that someone will pay for. His total earnings from November 1911 through February 1912 amount to approximately $8.40, averaging about $2.10 per month, far less than the $15 he earned during the 4 months of cotton season, but still essential for family survival. Samuel turns 9 years old on February 14, 1912. There is no celebration, no cake, no presents, because sharecropper families living on $1.55 per day don't have resources for birthday celebrations. Samuel's mother, Mary, acknowledges the day by allowing Samuel to sleep an extra 30 minutes past his usual 4:47 a.m. wake time, and she gives him a larger portion of cornmeal mush for breakfast. But otherwise, the day proceeds like any other. Samuel performs whatever work is available, earns whatever money he can, and goes to sleep exhausted knowing tomorrow will repeat the pattern. He has now been working for 4 years, since age 5, and he will continue working for the foreseeable future because his family needs his income and because no alternative exists within the economic system that structures sharecropping in the early 20th century South. The 1912 cotton season begins in late March, when Samuel and other workers start planting seeds in prepared fields. Work that pays only $0.30 per day, because planting requires less skill and generates less immediate value than harvesting. Samuel earns approximately $7.20 during the 6 weeks of planting season, 24 working days at $0.30 per day. Money that his family uses to pay accumulated debts from winter months when income fell below expenses. By June, the planted cotton has grown enough to require cultivation, chopping weeds, thinning plants to optimal spacing, maintaining irrigation. Work that pays $0.35 per day and occupies Samuel through July and most of August. Then, in late August, the harvest season begins again, and Samuel returns to picking cotton at the familiar rate of 40 cents per 100 pounds. His daily totals climbing from 85 pounds in late August to 134 pounds by mid-September, as his body has grown slightly. He's now 9 years old, stands 4 feet 4 inches tall, weighs 56 pounds, still significantly underweight for his age, and his increased size translates to modestly increased picking capacity. This pattern repeats through 1913 and 1914. Cotton season from August through October, off-season work during winter months. Total annual earnings of approximately $60 to $65 from Samuel's labor that goes entirely to family income rather than to Samuel himself. Meanwhile, 1,100 miles north in New York City, the National Child Labor Committee continues building their case for federal child labor legislation, using photographs like Samuel's to demonstrate that child labor is neither rare nor benign, but rather a systematic exploitation of millions of children whose labor enriches agricultural and industrial employers while destroying the children's health, education, and future prospects. The NCLC's campaign strategy involves multiple components: publishing investigative reports about child labor conditions, lobbying state legislatures to pass child labor laws. With mixed success, some states pass strong laws, others pass weak laws or no laws at all, and building public pressure for federal legislation that will apply uniformly across all states. The federal legislation effort faces substantial opposition from agricultural interests, textile manufacturers, and other industries that depend on child labor for their profitability, as well as from states' rights advocates who argue that labor regulation is state responsibility rather than federal power. But the NCLC's photographic evidence makes opposition arguments increasingly difficult to sustain. How can anyone view Hine's photographs of 8-year-old children working 14-hour days and argue that this situation doesn't require federal intervention? How can anyone see Samuel's scarred hands and claim that child labor is harmless? The photographs transform abstract debate about constitutional powers and economic impacts into concrete confrontation with images of actual children suffering actual harm from actual labor. The campaign's breakthrough comes in 1916 when Representative Edward Keating of Colorado and Senator Robert Owen of Oklahoma introduced legislation prohibiting interstate commerce in goods produced by child labor in factories, mines, and canneries. The legislation, known as the Keating-Owen Act, doesn't ban child labor directly, which might be unconstitutional under federal-state power division, but rather uses Congress's constitutional power to regulate interstate commerce to prevent products made by child labor from being sold across state lines. The logic is straightforward. If businesses can't sell child labor-produced goods in interstate commerce, they lose economic incentive to employ children, and child labor will decrease without federal government directly mandating labor practices. The legislation includes specific definitions. Children under 14 cannot be employed in covered industries. Children ages 14-16 cannot work more than 8 hours per day or more than 6 days per week. And children under 16 cannot work in mines. Congressional hearings on the Keating-Owen Act begin on January 17, 1916, and continue through February 8, featuring testimony from child labor reform advocates, industry representatives, state officials, and parents. The hearings also feature extensive use of Lewis Hine's photographs as documentary evidence. NCLC representatives set up displays showing 143 photographs of child workers across multiple industries and states, including Samuel's photograph from September 1911. Committee members examining these photographs see visual proof of the conditions that NCLC testimony describes. Children as young as 5 or 6 working in factories, children operating dangerous machinery, children working overnight shifts, children whose bodies show obvious signs of malnutrition and injury from industrial labor. Samuel's photograph proves particularly effective because it combines several elements that make child labor's injustice undeniable. First, Samuel is clearly very young. His small size and childish features make it impossible to argue he's actually older than claimed. Second, the cotton basket he holds provides scale reference that emphasizes his smallness. The basket is nearly a quarter of his body height, yet he's expected to fill it repeatedly throughout a 14-hour day. Third, his hands gripping the basket show visible scarring and damage despite the photograph's distance. suggesting that close examination would reveal even more severe injury. Fourth, his expression of blank exhaustion contradicts any argument that child labor is light work or that children enjoy it. Fifth, the cotton field stretching behind him to the horizon communicates the scale of the agricultural system that depends on child labor. Not just one field or one plantation, but an entire region's economy built on children's work. Representative Augustus Gardner of Massachusetts, questioning NCLC witnesses during the February 3, 1916 hearing session, asks, "Can you provide specific example of how child labor affects individual child's development and health?" The NCLC's representative, Owen Lovejoy, points to Samuel's photograph and responds, "This boy, Samuel Thomas, was 8 years old when photographed in 1911. He picked 127 pounds of cotton that day during a 14-hour work period. To pick that weight requires harvesting approximately 6,500 to 8,000 individual cotton bolls by hand. Each boll has sharp edges that cut hands. This child performs this labor 6 days per week during harvest season. He attends school approximately 23 days, total over 3 years, because cotton season overlaps with school year. He weighs 52 pounds when he should weigh 65 pounds, indicating chronic malnutrition. His hands show permanent scarring from cotton boll cuts. He earns 50 cents per day. That goes to his family, not to him. This is not occasional light work that builds character. This is systematic exploitation that destroys childhood." The testimony continues with statistical evidence. Approximately 2 million children under age 15 work in agriculture, mining, factories, and canneries in 1916. Child workers have injury rates 30 to 40% higher than adult workers in same industries. Children working full-time have school attendance rates below 30% compared to 85% for non-working children. Child workers show growth deficits averaging 15 to 20% compared to non-working children of same age. But the photographs provide the emotional impact that statistics alone cannot achieve. Numbers are abstract. Samuel's photograph is concrete. 2 million children is a statistic. One 8-year-old boy with scarred hands is a story that congressional members can visualize and remember. The Keating-Owen Act passes the House of Representatives on February 15, 1916, by a vote of 337 to 46, and passes the Senate on August 8, 1916, by a vote of 52 to 12. President Woodrow Wilson signs the act into law on September 1, 1916, marking the first federal legislation restricting child labor in American history. The law's key provisions: children under age 14 cannot be employed in manufacturing, mining, or quarrying. Children under age 16 cannot be employed in these industries if work occurs between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m., or exceeds 8 hours per day or 6 days per week. Products made in violation of these standards cannot be shipped in interstate commerce. The law takes effect on September 1, 1917, 1 year after its passage, to give businesses time to adjust their labor practices. But the Keating-Owen Act contains a crucial limitation. It applies only to manufacturing, mining, quarrying, and canning operations, not to agricultural labor. This agricultural exemption reflects political compromise necessary to secure Southern legislators' votes. Agriculture depends more heavily on child labor than other industries, and Southern states refuse to support legislation that would disrupt their economic model. The exemption means that Samuel Thomas, picking cotton in Mississippi, receives no benefit from the law that his photograph helped pass. He continues working in cotton fields through 1916, 1917, and subsequent years because agricultural child labor remains legal despite federal legislation prohibiting similar labor in factories and mines. The law's impact on non-agricultural child labor proves significant. Employment of children ages 10-15 in covered industries drops from approximately 1.8 million in 1916 to 1.0 million by 1918, a 44% reduction over 2 years. Factory owners who previously employed children under 14 must either replace them with older workers or face prohibition on selling their products in interstate commerce. The law saves countless children from factory work that injured and killed thousands annually. But it doesn't save Samuel or the approximately 1 million children who continue working in agriculture, because the law explicitly exempts agricultural labor. Samuel turns 13 years old on February 14, 1916, 5 months before the Keating-Owen Act passes Congress. He has now been working for 8 years since age 5, and his body shows the accumulated cost. He stands 5 feet 1 inch tall when he should be 5 feet 4 inches. He weighs 78 pounds when he should weigh 95 pounds. His hands are permanently scarred and show early signs of arthritis despite his young age. His back causes chronic pain from years of repetitive bending, and his eyes show damage from sun exposure during thousands of hours working outdoors without protection. His educational attainment totals approximately 67 days of formal schooling spread across 8 years, giving him basic literacy. He can read simple texts and write his name, but no mathematical knowledge beyond arithmetic necessary for cotton picking, no scientific education, no historical knowledge, no training for any work besides agricultural labor. Samuel's awareness of the Keating-Owen Act comes in September 1917, when the law takes effect and local newspapers report on its provisions and impact. Samuel, now 14 years old and legally too old to benefit from the law even if it applied to agriculture, reads a newspaper account of the law while in town purchasing supplies for his family. The article mentions Lewis Hine's photographs as evidence that helped secure the law's passage, and Samuel wonders if his own photograph from 6 years earlier contributed to the campaign. He has no way to confirm this. Hine didn't provide contact information when photographing Samuel, and Samuel has no means to communicate with the National Child Labor Committee in New York. But Samuel feels a complex mixture of pride that he might have helped other children and bitterness that the help doesn't extend to children like himself who continue working in agricultural labor. The Keating-Owen Act's effectiveness lasts less than 3 years. In June 1918, the Supreme Court rules in Hammer v. Dagenhart that the act exceeds Congress's constitutional authority under the Commerce Clause, holding that manufacturing is local activity that precedes commerce rather than being commerce itself, and therefore regulation of manufacturing conditions, including child labor, is state power rather than federal power. The decision invalidates the Keating-Owen Act entirely, returning child labor regulation to state control where it had been before 1916. Congress attempts to restore federal child labor restrictions through a different constitutional mechanism, taxing products made with child labor rather than prohibiting their interstate transport. But the Supreme Court invalidates this approach as well. In Bailey v. Drexel Furniture Company, 1922, holding that the tax is actually a regulatory penalty rather than legitimate revenue measure. These Supreme Court decisions mean that federal child labor legislation doesn't become permanent until the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which uses Congress's Commerce Clause power more carefully to withstand judicial review. The 1938 Act establishes minimum working age of 14 for non-agricultural jobs, 16 for jobs during school hours, and 18 for hazardous occupations. Crucially, the 1938 Act includes agricultural labor in some of its provisions, while maintaining exemptions that allow family farms to employ their own children, and that set lower minimum ages for agricultural work. These exemptions mean that Samuel, had he been born 25 years later, would have benefited from federal child labor protections. But they also mean that agricultural child labor continues in various forms throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century under exemptions that reflect agriculture's political influence. Samuel's adult life, from age 18 onward, follows the trajectory common for black men raised in sharecropping families in early 20th century Mississippi. Limited education, limited economic opportunities, limited ability to escape the region's oppressive economic and social systems. Samuel continues agricultural labor through his 20s, working as cotton picker and general farm laborer for wages that remain barely adequate for survival. He marries in 1922, at age 19, to a woman named Elizabeth, who was also raised in a sharecropping family, and they have 6 children between 1923 and 1936. Samuel's children all work in cotton fields during harvest seasons, continuing the pattern of child labor that Samuel himself experienced, because agricultural exemptions in child labor laws mean that Samuel's children are legally permitted to work at ages that would be prohibited in factories or mines. Samuel's participation in the Great Migration occurs in 1937, when he, Elizabeth, and their 6 children move from Mississippi to Chicago, seeking better economic opportunities. The migration follows the pattern of millions of black Americans leaving the South between 1916 and 1970 for industrial cities in the North and West, where Jim Crow segregation was less rigid and economic opportunities more available. Samuel finds work in Chicago's meatpacking plants, earning $0.45 per hour for 48-hour weeks, totaling $21.60 per week. Far more than he ever earned in Mississippi, and sufficient to rent a 3-room apartment in Chicago's South Side and send his children to school regularly rather than requiring them to work full-time. Samuel's children all complete at least 8th grade education, several complete high school, and one daughter completes 2 years of secretarial college, educational achievements impossible under the sharecropping system in Mississippi. Samuel lives until 1974. Dying at age 71 from complications of emphysema probably related to decades of exposure to cotton dust during his childhood and young adult years in Mississippi cotton fields. His obituary in the Chicago Defender, a prominent black newspaper, runs 4 paragraphs noting his birth in Mississippi, his migration to Chicago, his employment in meatpacking, and his survival by his wife, 6 children, 18 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. The obituary doesn't mention that Samuel was photographed by Lewis Hine in 1911, or that his photograph helped secure passage of the Keating-Owen Act in 1916, because Samuel never knew with certainty that his photograph had that impact, and never spoke publicly about his childhood as cotton picker. Lewis Hine's photograph of Samuel Thomas remains in the National Child Labor Committee's archives, which are donated to the Library of Congress in 1954. The photograph becomes one of the most frequently reproduced images in historical exhibitions and textbooks about child labor, progressive-era reform, and American economic history. Viewers examining the photograph in the 21st century see an 8-year-old boy holding a basket of cotton, but they often don't know what the photograph cost Samuel to create. The 4 hours and 36 minutes of work before Hine photographed him, the 9 hours and 37 minutes of work after Hine photographed him, the cuts on his hands that would never fully heal, the education he never received, the childhood he never experienced. The photograph documented Samuel's reality in September 1911, but it couldn't change that reality for Samuel himself because the reforms it helped inspire came too late and exempted agricultural labor where Samuel worked. The National Child Labor Committee's total collection of Lewis Hine's photographs numbers more than 5,000 images taken between 1908 and 1924, documenting children working in coal mines in Pennsylvania, textile mills in North Carolina, glass factories in West Virginia, shrimp canneries in Mississippi, and countless other industries and locations. Historians studying this collection in later decades note its profound impact on American child labor policy despite the legal setbacks of 1918 and 1922. The photographs created visual record that made child labor's reality undeniable for audiences who might otherwise dismiss written testimony as exaggerated. By showing actual children in actual working conditions with actual evidence of harm, Hine's photographs transformed abstract policy debate into concrete moral confrontation with images that demanded response. Modern analysis of the Keating-Owen Act and subsequent child labor legislation emphasizes the photograph's role as evidence that could not be dismissed or reinterpreted as easily as statistical data or verbal testimony. A factory owner might dispute a reformer's claim that 8-year-olds work in his factory. But he cannot dispute a photograph showing 8-year-old in his factory. A plantation owner might claim that child cotton pickers work only light hours. But he cannot dispute a photograph taken at 9:23 a.m. showing a child already exhausted from hours of labor. Visual evidence created accountability that verbal evidence alone could not achieve, making Hine's photographic documentation crucial to the eventual success of child labor reform, even though that success came slowly and incompletely. Samuel Thomas's photograph, specific as it is to one boy on one day in one cotton field, represents the experiences of approximately 2 million children working in American agriculture in 1911. Each of those children has a similar story. Work beginning at ages 5 or 6, days lasting 10-14 hours during harvest seasons, earnings going to families rather than to children themselves, educations limited or non-existent, bodies damaged by labor that exceeds their physical capacity, childhoods consumed by work that enriches employers while impoverishing workers. Samuel's photograph gave one face to this massive system, made one child's experience visible to audiences who could then extrapolate to the millions of children whose photographs were never taken, but whose labor sustained American agriculture. The agricultural exemption in child labor laws, which allowed Samuel's exploitation to continue even after the Keating-Owen Act passed, reflects agriculture's political power in early 20th century America, and also reflects urban-rural divide in labor reform movements. Urban reformers focused primarily on factory child labor because that labor was most visible to urban middle-class audiences who formed the base of support for reform. Agricultural child labor occurred in rural areas that urban reformers rarely visited, and that seemed less shocking to Americans who romanticized farming as wholesome activity. The reality that agricultural labor could be as exploitative and damaging as factory labor, that cotton picking destroyed children's bodies and futures just as surely as textile mills did, was less visible to reformers whose campaigns focused on industrial rather than agricultural child labor. This urban-rural reform gap meant that children like Samuel continued working in fields for decades after factory child labor became prohibited, creating a two-tier system where industrial child workers received legal protections while agricultural child workers remained vulnerable to exploitation. The gap persists in modified form into the 21st century, with agricultural work having higher minimum ages than other employment, but also having more exemptions that allow family farms and small operations to employ children under conditions that would be illegal in other industries. Modern child labor in American agriculture involves primarily children of migrant farm workers rather than sharecroppers' children, as in Samuel's era. But the basic pattern remains. Children working long hours for low pay in conditions that harm their education and health because agricultural exemptions in labor law permit what would be prohibited elsewhere. Samuel Thomas's final testimony about his childhood comes in a 1969 interview conducted by a Chicago State University graduate student researching Great Migration history. The interview, recorded on audio tape now preserved in the university's archives, includes Samuel's description of his childhood labor. "I picked cotton from age 5 to age 18, every year, 6 days a week during season. I picked as much as 134 pounds in a day when I was 9 or 10 years old. My hands hurt every day during picking season. My back still hurts now, 50 years later. from all that bending. I went to school maybe 60 or 70 days total over 12 years because cotton season overlapped school year and family needed my wages more than I needed education. I can read and write, but not well. I never learned mathematics beyond basic arithmetic. I never learned science or history in school. Everything I know, I learned from life. The interviewer asks Samuel if he regrets his childhood labor or if he believes it built character, as some defenders of child labor argued. Samuel's response, captured on tape 5 years before his death: "Regret doesn't change what happened. I did what my family needed me to do to survive. But don't tell me it built character or taught me responsibility. It taught me that poor children's bodies get used up to make rich people richer. It taught me that the law protects property more than it protects children. It taught me that childhood is a privilege reserved for people with money, and that poor children don't get to be children. Those are true lessons. But they're not the kind of character building that defenders of child labor like to claim. I survived. Many children didn't, and none of us should have had to work like that in the first place." This testimony, given 58 years after Hine photographed Samuel in that Mississippi cotton field, reflects Samuel's mature understanding of the system that exploited him and millions of other children. He doesn't romanticize his childhood labor as character building, doesn't accept the justifications that employers and some policymakers offered for child labor, and doesn't minimize the permanent damage that labor caused. He survived, but survival is not the same as thriving. And Samuel's limited education and chronic health problems limited his opportunities throughout his life in ways that no amount of hard work could overcome. The photograph of 8-year-old Samuel Thomas holding his basket of cotton, taken on September 14, 1911, at 9:23 a.m., documents a moment in one child's life that represented the daily reality for millions of children across America. That photograph, combined with thousands of similar images and years of reform advocacy, eventually contributed to legal protections that prohibit the kind of labor Samuel performed. But those protections came too late for Samuel. Came with exemptions that allowed agricultural child labor to continue, and took decades to become comprehensive enough to truly protect children from exploitation. Samuel picked 127 pounds of cotton on the day Hine photographed him. He picked similar amounts on thousands of other days throughout his childhood. He earned approximately 50 cents per day that went to his family rather than to himself. He lost his education, his health, and his childhood to labor that enriched plantation owners while impoverishing workers. If you examine Hine's photograph carefully, looking at Samuel's face and hands and the cotton field stretching behind him, you see both documentary evidence and human tragedy. Evidence that child labor existed in forms that harmed children systematically, and tragedy that this particular child's labor continued for years after his photograph helped reform laws because agricultural exemptions meant the reforms didn't apply to him. Samuel Thomas was photographed once, labored for 13 years picking cotton, moved to Chicago seeking better life, worked in meatpacking for 37 years, raised 6 children who received educations he never had, and died in 1974, having survived childhood labor that killed many others, but that marked him permanently with scars, pain, and limited opportunities. His photograph remains as evidence of what America tolerated and what reforms eventually prohibited. A reminder that childhood protection requires not just moral rhetoric, but actual laws that apply to all children in all industries, with no exemptions that allow exploitation to continue under legal protection.